Hello everyone and welcome back to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. I'm your host Ari Stamatakos and today we're here with a slightly different type of video. Now, of course, with the NRL and the AFL adopting a gather round or magic round kind of thing in the last couple of years, we're going to be looking at the hypothetical scenario in which the A-League decide to adopt it as well. Obviously, the AFL have adopted it this year with going to Adelaide, the NRL going to Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. So let's take a look at what would happen if the A-League decided to adopt it, take a look at any hypothetical questions, what it would look like, why it should happen, why it shouldn't happen, potential downfalls, all the whole 9 yards. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's kick things off by touching on what exactly is the gather or magic round. Now, the AFL have coined it gather round, the NRL have coined it magic round, so I'm assuming if the A-League decided to create one of their own, they have to create a different name for it. But basically it is where every single club in the league for one round move to a certain city and play all their games, or all the games for the round in the one city. The AFL adopted it this year and they all went to Adelaide playing 9 games in 3 different stadiums, whereas the NRL have adopted it in 2019 and have done it in one stadium. Suncorp Stadium will be the venue this year, where basically every single game in the round will be played at Suncorp Stadium. The AFL, of course, had every single game in the round played across 3 different stadiums: Adelaide Oval, Mount Barker, and Norwood. So I don't really know which kind of avenue the A-League would go if they were to do it, but for the sake of this video, we're going to be going with every single game in a certain round of the A-League men's season will be played in one stadium, be played at one ground. So we're going to be looking at the NRL approach for the A-League. So let's take a look at which cities or which grounds could be viable for these certain rounds, and take a look at and conclude with what stadium would be the best stadium to host a magic round for the A-League. So let's move on by looking at which potential grounds or which cities would be the most viable to host an A-League men's magic rounds. And also, just to preface this, I'm just going to refer to it as magic round for the rest of the video. It won't be called magic round if it was to ever happen for the A-League, but I just can't be bothered saying gather or magic round every single time I mention the name of the round. So let's just refer to it as magic round for the rest of this video. Okay, so obviously you've got the main cities: Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, Newcastle, and Central Coast. Wellington, with all due respect, I don't think that they would be considered. I would very much doubt if it was considered, although it would be cool, but I doubt it would happen. So obviously with Melbourne, you've got Amy Park, which is probably the one ground that they would choose. Sydney, really, it's a raffle between CommBank or Sydney Football Stadium. Perth would probably be HBF Stadium, if I could speak. Brisbane, Suncorp, you'd assume. I doubt it'd go to Redcliffe. Adelaide, Cooper's the obvious choice. Newcastle and Central Coast, obviously McDonald Jones Stadium and Central Coast Stadium, respectively. Now, let's take a look at it from a kind of realistic or a kind of fantasy perspective. If we're looking at what the A-League or the APL would do, I would be shocked if the APL decided to do a magic round for the A-League. I'd be shocked if it wasn't in Sydney. Of course, we all know the controversy around selling the grand final to Sydney for the next 3 years. I do think, while that was a little bit of a inspiration to actually make this video and to kind of go through a hypothetical of what would happen if instead of doing the grand final, they just moved the whole round to a certain city, I would assume it would be Sydney. I think that would ruffle a lot of feathers, considering, especially in the recent in the aftermath of the grand final incident, I should say. So yeah, I would hazard a guess and say it would be Sydney. I don't think it would be Perth, Brisbane, Newcastle, or Central Coast. I would be shocked if it was Melbourne, because I think I just don't think, especially in the light of what happened in the Melbourne derby. I know that would have been quite a while after, or quite a while ago, if this was to ever occur. I just don't think it would be Melbourne, as much as me, a Melburnian, would love to see it. I doubt it would be. And Adelaide is an interesting one. Adelaide is an interesting one. And to me, it is between Adelaide and Sydney. The APL would definitely choose Sydney, in my opinion. But for me personally, out of all those cities, I would choose Adelaide. I would choose Adelaide to host an A-League men's magic round, and there's a couple of reasons for it, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But to kind of quickly brief it before I move into it in a little bit more depth just now, I think Adelaide has more upside than all of the other cities, and I also think there is more pros to cons from a holistic perspective in comparison to every other city. So let's go in depth as to why I've picked Adelaide South Australia, Adelaide, and then subsequently Cooper Stadium to host an A-League Men's Magic Round. So let's take a look at why I've chosen Adelaide to be the host for the A-League Men's Magic Round, and there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, I think Cooper Stadium is the best pure football stadium in the country, especially for the A-League audience. Now, Sydney Football Stadium and CommBank are of course fantastic grounds. Amy Park as well is a great venue, but I think for the state in which the A-League is in, which it's not in its prime, if we're being honest, and it's not on its knees, but it's not in its prime either. I think for the state in which the league is in at the moment, and for the general kind of vibes around the A-League at the moment, I think Cooper Stadium is the best football stadium in the country. I think the way it's a rectangular stadium, it's small, it's close to the pitch, it's got a good capacity, and the overall venue and the hospitality of it, I think it's the best. I think when you speak to everyone who goes to away days in Adelaide, they love the experience. Obviously, Adelaide supporters love the ground as well. I think Cooper Stadium is the best football ground in the country, especially for the A-League. So I think you have to kind of reward that in a sense. Another thing you have to reward, in my opinion, is the form, in a sense, of Adelaide United. I know it's a little bit kind of superficial to be like, oh, they're the best team in the country, or like they're one of the best teams in the country, let's just give it to them. I think when you take a look at their support, their performances, their ability to help Australian football, I think they are probably the best city when you combine all of those three things. So I think you have to reward them in that respect. Furthermore, the South Australian government already have experience in hosting a kind of magic round. Of course, they hosted gather rounds this season for the AFL. They'll host it until 2026, so they have experience in knowing what to do, knowing how to organise it, hospitality, facilities, how to maintain the grounds. All those different factors, they would have experience in being able to make sure that the rounds will run smoothly and no kind of hiccups will occur. I also think South Australia is almost the surrogate home of football in this country. I know the APL have kind of pushed Sydney to be the home of football in Australia, as well as Football Australia. Of course, a lot of Socceroos games are played in Sydney. Obviously, the grand final was moved to Sydney, so I think that's what the establishment are trying to push. But when we take a look at how many players have come out of South Australia, when we take a look at what they've done so far, what they've done for the current kind of crop of Socceroos and current crop of A-League players, and what they've done for the A-League, I think you have to reward that. I think you have to reward South Australia for that, and I think it would fit best. I genuinely would think it would fit best if South Australia hosted the football, or the football equivalent of Magic Round. And another kind of like cherry on top, or like a little bit of a sprinkle on top, if that makes sense, I think there are a lot of fantastic player ambassadors. The likes of Craig Woodward and the likes of Nestor Irakunda both have fantastic stories, both can inspire different generations of people, both are very high-profile figures in the footballing landscape. We've already seen both of them do a lot of media appearances or be very, very interactive with their community. So I think they're two. I know it's a little bit of like a superficial thing or something to just kind of not a big kind of aspect of why I think Adelaide should host it, but I think it's a little cherry on top. I think they're two fantastic ambassadors for the game. Assuming both of them still play for Adelaide at the time this occurs, I think that is another reason why Coopers and subsequently Adelaide would be the best host for the gather round, magic round even, for the A-League. So let's move on and let's take a look at what it actually will bring to the league, because there are a lot of pros and there are a few cons in what could happen. So let's take a look at the pros as to what the magic round could bring to the A-League. So let's take a look at what this will actually bring to the A-League if this magic round ever actually happened for football in this country. Now, what I think it would bring first and foremost is that it would bring eyes. It would bring eyes to the product. I wouldn't think it would necessarily bring so many, like it wouldn't be a drastic difference, but I think the idea of another magic round happening for another code in the country just naturally brings more news items, more newspaper articles. It just brings more publicity to football in this country, which I think it needs. It also shows that football is being kind of inclusive in a sense, and also being adaptive to the times. It's obviously worked for the NRL, it's worked for the A-League, for the AFL. Why wouldn't it work for the A-League in that sense, right? I think just kind of superficially, it will bring a lot of eyes to the round, or to the sport, I should say. Furthermore, I think it also brings a lot of television eyes as well, because in a kind of similar vein to how I just mentioned, it just brings eyes just for publicity's sake. I also think people will want to watch the games just to see how it looks, like just kind of to see the novelty for it. It's never happened. Something like this has never happened really for the A League. Of course, we did see a little bit of it during COVID, but that was a shambles, right? That was not really you can't really compare it to what this Magic Round could be. When you take a look at big potential crowds like an Adelaide, or we'll touch on a potential schedule for it as well, but if Adelaide are versing like a Melbourne Victory or a Sydney FC, that will draw not only probably a packed out Cooper Stadium, but it will probably draw a lot of eyes on TV as well. So I think if this was to occur, I think it would add a lot of TV eyes to the product. And I also think there could be a realm for it to have all of the games for this round on free-to-air TV. I think that would be a massive, massive thing for the sport. Maybe not all, but at least one more. At least having 3 games on this round, one on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, all free-to-air TV, I think will be a big, big thing for the league from a television perspective. And when we're taking a look at more eyes on the product, this festival of football, which is obviously a term that has been coined by the APL for the grand final kind of moving to Sydney, I think there will be a true festival of football if there was a gather round, or a Magic Round I should say, in Adelaide. You can create a proper festival for football. You have all the fans travelling to one city, to one ground. You can really create like a festival, like a carnival type atmosphere with I don't know, raffles or like all these different things which have been done in the NRL and the AFL as well. Knowing people who have been to both the NRL gather round and the AFL, or the NRL Magic Round and the AFL gather round, some of their highlights weren't even going to the games. It was just the general vibes around the stadium, around the city. We saw how well Adelaide did it with gather round for the AFL. Why can't they do it for the A League as well? It won't be spread out. It will just be at one ground, so they can concentrate all their activities and all their resources into one area where it can create a proper festival, proper carnival type atmosphere. I think that will bring a lot of good publicity to the game, and it will bring. Furthermore, it will bring a lot of money into the game as well. That is obviously something that has been a major talking point when it comes to a lot of media, what the media have kind of talked about when it comes to, in particular, the grand final being sold to Sydney. We need the money, the league needs the money, the sport needs the money. And I think, whilst I don't necessarily disagree that the A-League needs a cash injection, and while the sport in this country needs a cash injection, I think a gather round would be the best way to do it. Firstly, South Australia will need to buy it. We need to buy the rights to host the gather round, which automatically creates a cash injection there. But I also think all the ticket revenue, or if they can strike a deal with the flights, with people who do the flights, or accommodation, something like that, and even the festival kind of atmosphere and the carnival type atmosphere, that's just more money being injected into the league. Being able to put merchandise stands, all these little things which in isolation don't seem like a lot, but all together can create a big cash injection for the league. Something that I think will actually happen, rather than what I think the APL think will happen for the grand final, if that makes any sense, if I've articulated myself there as well. But so yeah, I think the ability for more money to be injected into the game is probably the big talking point and the big reason why a Magic Round should happen. And I think when you take a look at what this Magic Round brings, I think what it will bring, if it is done correctly, kind of outweighs any kind of con that will happen with it as well. Of course, the fan kind of culture around A-League, unfortunately, is a lot different to what it is with the NRL and with the AFL. So I think there needs to be a lot, and the A-League need to tread carefully when it comes to having a lot of fans in one area, like especially with rival fans with like Sydney and Western Sydney and Victory and Melbourne City, etc. I think they need to be careful in that respect. But as long as you don't schedule any derbies, any rivalries, I think it should be fine. And I think if you have every single supporter base traveling to one city, I think that will create a big kind of positive influence for the league, a big advertisement for the league. And if it goes off without a hitch, which is a major if, I'm aware, I think the pros will definitely outweigh the cons. But in the sake of balance, in the sake of kind of overall kind of summarizing this conversation, let's take a look at some potential downfalls that could happen if this Magic Round wasn't to go to plan and was to fail in a sense. So yeah, let's take a look at some potential downfalls right now. So some potential downfalls or some potential cons that could come about from this Magic Round for the A-League is I've got 3 written down. Firstly, the first point is an extra home game for Adelaide United. I don't think this matters. I think just create an extra round. With all due respect, the fixture is already compromised to beyond the point of any repair already. So I think just adding an extra round, kind of what they did with the AFL, they just added an extra round. Yeah, it's an extra home game for Adelaide, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't really think it matters all that much. I do understand the competition integrity is something that has been a major talking point for the A-League for quite a few years now, but the fixture is already a mess as it is, so I don't really think that matters all that much. Secondly, the facilities could be an issue. Of course, there only being one ground, meaning there's probably only going to be 4 changing rooms max, and if you have 3 games on at the same day, Coopers isn't necessarily a big stadium. It's not like Suncorp, it's not like Sydney Football Stadium or Adelaide Oval even, where there is room at least to create a lot more to create a lot of changing rooms and to create a lot of different facilities to kind of aid the streamlined process of this Magic Round. I think if you were given 6 months notice, if you give Adelaide 6 months notice, and you give them the funding and you give them the license to kind of create new facilities and to allow it to happen properly, I don't think this should be an issue. Football is probably the second biggest sport in South Australia. If you're South Australian, let me know if I'm wrong in the comments below. But as a Victorian and as a person who lives in Melbourne, from an external perspective, football is a big part of the culture in South Australia. So I think the demands will be there, and there will be a lot of license to build new facilities and to get this going and to make it run very, very well, and to have the operations of it be streamlined, because I think it will look bad on not only the A-League, but it will look bad on South Australia if this didn't work, and if there wasn't enough facilities, or if it just broke, if the Magic Round just broke halfway through, and there was not enough change rooms, not enough hotels, not enough XYZ, right? So I think with 6 months' notice, the fact that South Australia does care a lot about football from an external perspective, at least, I think this shouldn't be an issue. Now, when we're taking a look at the final point. The final point is, what if it fails? What if it doesn't work? Now, not only would it look bad for the league, it would look bad for South Australia. However, I think while this will be another hurdle for the A-League to kind of overcome in a sense, I genuinely don't see a world in which this fails for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the blueprint is already there for the AFL and the NRL. The blueprint is already there, right? This isn't a new concept that the A-League are trying to produce that has a lot of potential risks. The blueprint is already there. And not only is the blueprint already there, hosting it in Adelaide, South Australia have already done it before. They've done it for the AFL. The AFL is a lot more demanding when it comes to a Magic Round than the A-League will be. I think it should be fine. I don't see a world in which, as long as it's done properly and as long as the due diligence has been taken care of, I don't see a world in which this fails. So they're the potential downfalls. I don't think there is any drastic downfalls that could happen that could destroy the league or could create a major impact. I think overall, I don't see a world in which there is a net negative. I think there can only be a net positive for the A-League if they did decide to host a Magic Round in Adelaide in particular. But I think generally, there can only be a net positive. So let's take a look at a potential schedule that could happen and a potential kind of what games would happen for a A-League Magic Round if it was to happen in Adelaide. So let's take a look at that right now. So let's take a look at a potential schedule that could happen for the A-League Men's Magic Round. Now, I think you need to take a look at a couple of things into account. Firstly, you need to take a look into account of travel for both fans and teams. So I think you need to be able to schedule like Wellington, I think, have to play on at least the Saturday. There is no way Wellington should be forced to play on the Sunday. Same with Perth as well. I think it would be a little bit unfair if they were forced to play on the Sunday, personally. So there are obviously a couple of factors. Secondly, you need to take into account there's only one ground, so you need to be able to separate the games. You need to be able to separate the games well enough so that players have time to warm up, the pitch can get the right maintenance, fans can move in and out of the stadiums, etc., etc. So subsequently, because of that, let's take a look at the fixture that I've got, and leave your thoughts in a potential fixture in the comments below. All the games, what time, etc., etc. So Friday night, kicking off the rounds, I think you have to have Adelaide kicking off the round, and I've got Adelaide versus Melbourne Victory. Adelaide versus Melbourne Victory, 7:30 local time. I think that will be full capacity, start the round off with a bang, and really get it going, really get the fire starter going, as I think. Sold out stadium, probably will be a good game. It's a rivalry game as well. Victory support always travel well up to Adelaide. Adelaide always sell out that game. That should go off without a hitch. That should be the best game of the round, in my opinion. So I think they have to, and I think also that has to be a free-to-air game. So whether that means that you move the Saturday free-to-air game to the Friday, or you move the Sunday free-to-air game to the Saturday and move the Saturday to the Friday, then you do that. But I think that game has to be free-to-air, no matter what. So you have to work your way around that. But I think Adelaide versus Melbourne Victory, 7:30 local time, that is the game that kicks it off. Moving on to Saturday, I think you've got Wellington versus Perth at 1:30 local time. You've got Newcastle versus Brisbane at 4:10 local time. And I think Western Sydney versus Central Coast Mariners, 7:20 local time. So there is 2 hours 40 minutes difference there's 2 hours 40 minutes gap between all of those games, for the most part anyway. There's at least 2 hours 40 minutes gap for those games for the most part. I think Wellington versus Perth, that has to be it very early, considering where obviously Perth is quite a while away. Wellington's in a different continent technically, so I think they have to play quite early on the Saturday. Newcastle versus Brisbane, I think both sides have pretty good travelling fans, and I think putting that in the middle as kind of like a buffer heading into the night, I think that will be good. And I think Western Sydney versus Central Coast, that will probably be the second or maybe the third best game when it comes to fan attendance. 7:20 under the lights at Cooper Stadium, I think that will be a fantastic spectacle. So that is what I think should occur on Saturday. On Sunday, I've got Western United versus Melbourne City at 2 p.m. and I've got Sydney versus Macarthur at 5:30. Now, potential issues with these two, Western United versus Melbourne City, the attendance could be an issue there. I'm not saying that as a bitter Melbourne Victory supporter. I'm just looking at it from the facts. Like, both sides don't really have that big a supporter base, but hopefully with the incentive of it being a gather round, hopefully a lot more fans will travel, and hopefully a lot of neutrals will travel as well. Melbourne City are a fantastic side to watch, so hopefully people will go as a neutral to really fill that out. And Sydney versus Macarthur as well, I've moved that into the 5:30 slot. Initially, I had the two games swapped. I'd have Western United versus Melbourne City at the final game, but I think Sydney will have a lot of home fans there, so I think you have to start the round off well and you have to end the round off well when it comes to a spectacle kind of perspective. I think that is the main thing the A-League need to be able to ensure in this round, is that the spectacle is good, because that is the thing that carries the A-League. The A-League probably at its best is the best spectacle, one of the better spectacles in Australian sport. So I think being able to nail that on all 3 days is the key for this one. I think you need to have a pretty good gap between both games. I've got 2 hours 40 between both. That should be adequate. I'm pretty sure that should be adequate enough. You need to have at least 4 change rooms throughout that. So obviously there'd be two for Coopers automatically. So whether that means adding 2 more, or if there's 2 more already in there, or kind of revamping a storage room into a change room, that will need to happen as well. But I was tempted to put a Thursday night game in there. I decided against it. I was tempted to put a double header on Friday, maybe go with like a Friday 5:40, but I thought against that as well. I thought just have Friday 1 game, 3 on Saturday, and then 2 on Sunday. I think that is probably the best way you could do it. So yeah, they're the games that I think should happen. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below about a potential schedule that you would like to see, or a fixture list that you would like to see, if an A-League Magic Round was to go to Adelaide. So let's conclude this video by giving our overall thoughts and just kind of summarising the main points that have been covered throughout this video. So to conclude, I think an A-League Magic Round, I wouldn't say it needs to happen, but I think it would be a very, very good idea for the APL to look into the potential for an A-League Magic Round. Not only will it be a source of income for the league, which is desperately needed. I think when you take a look at the backlash that came from the grand final decision, moving it to Sydney, I think a lot of people kind of looked at it and thought, why didn't you just do what the NRL and the AFL have done? I think that would be a lot better. I think a lot of people would travel for it, and I think there's almost been a universal positive reaction from both NRL fans and AFL fans when it came to their code. So why wouldn't there be for A-League fans as well? we all know there needs to be a level of due diligence taken care when it comes to supporters and when it comes to safety, etc., because that's obviously been a major talking point and a major kind of crisis this season for the A-League. But I think if it is run well, the South Australia government do have a good track record in running a Magic Round / Gather Round quite well. I think this should be good. I think this will be good for the league. Like I said, I think there will only be a net positive for the league, and if it doesn't blow everything out of the water, and if it's not the best thing since sliced bread on the first iteration, there's no pressure in doing it again the year after or the year after that. Make it a rolling 1 year deal. If Adelaide, if it blows everything out of the water like it did for Gather Round with Adelaide, have it in Adelaide again. Or if it did well in Adelaide, but they need to be able to move it around, you can move it to Sydney, you can move it to Melbourne, you can move it to Brisbane, you can move it to even I don't know, Wellington even. I think that would be cool. Although I don't think that would work. It would be cool though. So yeah. There you go. They're my 2 cents on it. Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think it will be good if the A-League decide to implement a Magic Round? I think I personally think it will be, as I've said. So yeah, make sure you leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Make sure you leave your thoughts on anything I've said. If you disagree, agree, I would like to see your guys' points of view. But yeah, make sure you subscribe to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. Like the video. See you guys next time, and goodbye.